I am so glad that you're here this evening. I'm Elizabeth Benyon. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at IU South Bend, where I'm also on the faculty of the Political Science Department and Director of our voter engagement efforts through the American Democracy Project. And we are delighted to be back here at LangLab for Pop-Up University. The idea behind Pop-Up University, which is supported by Indiana Humanities, is that at Indiana University South Bend, we don't only want to partner with our community, but we recognize that we are part of the community. Our students live, work, and play in the community. Many of them return to the community, and we very much see ourselves as part of this community, and we want more interactions between folks on campus and off campus. And this is an opportunity really to bring the campus to the community by bringing a classroom to the community and really highlighting some of the research and teaching that our faculty do. And I am just absolutely delighted to have Kelcey Ervick as our speaker tonight. She does have some of the books that she's written for sale: Venmo, PayPal, Visa, or cash. If you decide that you would like to purchase any of those, no purchase required. So one of the things that we know about Kelcey is she's incredibly productive, both as a scholar and as a teacher, and you'll hear a little bit about the way she's been able to combine history, art through illustration, as well as storytelling in her work to really tell stories that matter. She's also an incredibly great colleague and stellar human being, so that never hurts. I just want to really quickly read her official third-person bio. Kelcey Ervick is the author of the graphic memoir, The Keeper, and her 3 previous award-winning books of fiction and nonfiction are The Bitter Life of Bozina Nemkova, Lillian's Balcony, and For Sale by Owner. She is editor with Tom Hart of The Field Guide to Graphic Literature, which will be coming out from Rose Metal Press in 2023. Her stories, essays, and comics have appeared in The Rumpus, The Believer, Washington Post, Lit Hub, Colorado Review, Passages North, Quarterly West, Booth, Notre Dame Review, and elsewhere. I think I mentioned she's very prolific and productive. She has received grants from Indiana Arts Commission, the Sustainable Arts Foundation, New Frontiers in Arts and Humanities at Indiana University. She has a PhD from the University of Cincinnati and is a professor of English and creative writing at Indiana University South Bend, where she's also working with students to tell stories that matter, and perhaps she'll tell us a little bit about that this evening as well. So I don't want to take up a single second longer, so I will hand it over to Kelcey.
Now I know why I was trying to move my music stand over, because I wanted to have my wine handy. Yeah, I've been doing a number of events. This is the first one I can have a glass of wine with me, so I'm going to take advantage of it. Thank you so much to the IU South Bend Community Engagement Association program, whatever we are. Thank you, Elizabeth Benyon, for all of your work putting this together with the cocktails and the mocktails and the snacks. And thanks to everyone for being here. Okay, my mic is on, my clicker is on, and hopefully it's going to work. So yeah, this is me doing what I like to do, which is just sit in bed reading Nabokov. Yeah, tonight I'm going to talk about my journey. Like, I've been writing mostly with words for most of my creative life, and my journey into drawing and telling stories with illustrations. And I'm going to just kind of take us back to last summer. I was so excited. My book, The Keeper, was about to come out. It celebrates Title IX, which then the 50th anniversary of Title IX was on June 23rd, 2022. And a day after that, the Supreme Court made a decision that kind of gave me whiplash as I was celebrating Title IX that week, and that was the Dobbs decision. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to respond, how I felt, how to grapple with my feelings about it. And at the same time that weekend, I downloaded the Merlin bird app and started learning like bird calls and recognizing bird calls. And the next thing I knew, things were coming together, and I was creating protest birds. The northern flicker dissents, the dove mourns, the starlings murmur, no. The Canada goose finds itself in the wrong country. And do not underestimate the common sweet-songed robin. That worm is labeled the patriarchy. The birds, the drawings, the combination of drawing and image, of text and image, gave me a voice to express something that I didn't feel like I could express really otherwise. There's an immediacy to having these images and the words just right there. And like I said, I felt like I could speak through the birds, but also through my drawings. So I'm going to talk a little bit. This is, okay, and then I just wanted to show you my journey of my first book. That's what the pages looked like. My second book, there's a little more white space, but still all words. My third book has some white space and a drawing on it. My next book has kind of the same thing, and then The Keeper is now like hand lettered, like all of the words are handwritten by me. There's speech bubbles, there's more of that like comics sequence. And so that's been sort of like an overview of the last, 12 years of my writing journey. And those are all the books. And I want to talk about one of the really cool things about comics and visual storytelling. And this is from a book called Unflattening by Nick Sousanis, where he writes about how comics hold sequential and simultaneous modes in electric tension. And what he means by that is like the simultaneous mode is like when you saw this image, you could kind of take it all in simultaneously as one image. But it's also sequential, which means you're going to go from panel to panel to panel and kind of, read through the story. And he talks about how everything becomes one. So he's got kind of this Buddha figure representing that. And an example of that here, this is from Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, which was one of the books that really got me excited about doing graphic literature. And just like right away here, you get this image of this duality that the protagonist, Marjane herself, is experiencing. And the text says, I really didn't know what to think about the veil, because this is during the Iranian Revolution, and suddenly at age 10, she and all of her fellow classmates are being forced to wear a veil. And she says, deep down, I was very religious, but as a family, we were very modern and avant-garde. And so she's got this dualism with like her on the right, the modern avant-garde family, and then on the left with the veil and her religious leanings. And so just that image conveys that before you even read the lines. This is a spread from The Keeper where I wasn't intentionally copying Persepolis, but where I was kind of trying to do the same thing, just on a spread before. I'm not even going to read the text here. I'm just going to let the images synchronously speak for themselves, that there's a duality here, there's a repeated image, but one's in black background with white, and one's white with black foreground. And it's me and my friend, and we've been friends for years and on the same soccer teams, and things aren't going so well. Also in Unflattening, Nick Sousanis talks about how he says we draw not to transcribe ideas from our heads, but to generate them in search of greater understanding. And so I love how he's got this image of the thinker, as if like all we do is think and like we learn everything in our head. And he kind of morphs it into someone drawing and producing knowledge in that way. And I think we do that through writing, we do it through drawing, but so much of our thinking is like a physical process through the body. And an example for me, and this is a page from The Keeper, is when I was in like 4th grade, I lived in Pittsburgh. I was a big fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I also went around catching tiger swallowtail butterflies. And it wasn't until I was like drawing them that I realized like, oh my gosh, they look just alike. and so I say in the book, like, maybe the reason I was so into tiger swallowtails was that they looked like the Pittsburgh Steelers and Pirates uniforms that I was so into. But we make meaning through metaphors and through connections like that. And so I'm always looking for like ways to, see images, connect, and the way that he like moves through there I think is beautiful. An example from Alison Bechdel's Fun Home. So again, just like looking at this image, you can take it all in synchronously and then read the text where she basically says like, my home was like an artist's residency. Like we all had our individual isolated pursuits. We were all under the same household, but we all had our creative pursuits. And you can already get a sense of that from the image of this like separation. Everyone's like in the same space, but doing different things. And then here, again, you don't have to read the text, but just seeing the way that the sequence of her doing airplane with her father, and she's getting lifted up and balancing. And this is from the opening page. The whole book is about her relationship with her father, who was a closeted gay man who ended up committing suicide right as she was coming into her own gay sexuality. So it's a really like intense story. And it opens with this image of her like being raised up on her dad's legs. And then as you turn the page, it's like she's falling down. And what she does in this cool way is compare this to Icarus. And she says that like in circus acts, they call this the Icarian something or whatever. And she's noting like that, of course, it's like named after Icarus, who when he gets, too close to the sun, he melts, falls. So she's working out these are metaphors she's working out. You kind of take them in immediately, but then you read through them sequentially. And then an artist who had a big impact on me who was not doing like traditional panel comics is Myra Coleman. And this is from her book, Sarah Berman's Closet. And what I love about this is, it's not panel, but it's this like dramatic, colorful image. And the text and the image provide different information. So the text says, one night she left with just one suitcase, saying goodbye to everything she owned. And in a way, the image illustrates that and sort of repeats that information, but it also lets readers know, like, she actually owned a lot of nice stuff. It's a nice space that she's leaving, and it also, the colors, the posture of the body, like, just creates this amazing mood that communicates, what the words have not. So those have been some like influences on me and some ways of thinking about how images and text work together. I'm now going to read a little bit from just like the opening few pages of The Keeper. So chapter 1 is called The Creation of the Girls. Everyone knows how birds are created. Less is known about how birds become girls. Our flock came from the banks of the Ohio River. As with all girls, our wings were removed, or did they fall off? But we were given special gifts that few girls had before, and we had to learn how to use them. Mr. Ryan's video begins with a still shot, one of dozens of team photos we'll take over the years. Our uniforms have sashes, like we're all Miss America. I'm in the middle, in blue, the keeper. Our team was the 1971 Cardinals, named for Ohio State bird, and the year we were all born. We spent the 1980s traveling in a flock to soccer tournaments. A flock of cardinals is called a radiance, and we were radiant. Every tournament we touched turned to gold. Mr. Ryan, a cyborg in cutoff jeans, recorded it all. In 1987, we competed in the U.S. Girls Nationals Tournament in Seattle. I was 16. My hair suffered from a combination of hairspray and sun-in. Seattle was as far from Ohio as I'd ever been. The top 4 teams in the country were there: California, Texas, New York, and us, Ohio. Everything was fancy. My teammates and I felt important because someone other than Mr. Ryan filmed our games and interviewed us 2 at a time. Who will be the first to get pregnant, they asked. Who will be the first to get married? Who will have the most kids? These are the questions they asked the best girls soccer players in the nation. Not one of us said, "Are these the same questions you ask the boys' teams?" Maybe the questions weren't so far off. One of my teammates got pregnant the next year, and another the year after that. I was about to start dating the guy I would eventually marry and divorce. Most of us became teachers, nurses, stay-at-home moms. But it makes me wonder, can different questions conjure different futures? So what if they had asked us, who wants to be the first to play on the women's national team? How many gold medals do you want to win? Who will be the first woman president? But in 1987, there was no Women's World Cup, no women's soccer in the Olympics. We'd never heard of a U.S. women's national team, and we still haven't had a woman president. Okay, so I wrote The Keeper for a couple of reasons. One was that I wanted to kind of reconcile. I'd grown up as an athlete playing on this competitive soccer team as a goalkeeper, actually on several different soccer teams. And then kind of like when college ended and I played through college, when that ended, that was kind of the end of my sports career. And then I started pursuing my literary career as a writer and artist. And they just seemed like very different identities and experiences. I was the only student athlete who was an English major. Student athlete who was an English major. And it just always seemed like a strange pairing. And so they, things kind of separated, but then we had a reunion of my Cardinals team, and you get older, you start looking back at things, and at the reunion we got this video that I was referring to that Mr. Ryan filmed, and I started thinking back a lot more about my old soccer days, and I wanted to think about how that experience as an athlete connected with my life as a writer, and rather than just seeing them as different experiences, but seeing the connections. So part of this book is that journey, and then the other really big thing was wanting to understand more about how Title IX shaped my entire existence. It was signed into law in 1972. It's the law that prohibits sex discrimination in educational institutions and programs. And it's basically, of course, best known for the huge growth in sports programs for girls and women. And when I was in high school, I didn't understand any of that. When I was in college, we didn't even talk about it. And by then, Title IX had been around 20 years. So I wanted to learn more about Title IX and how it came to be, and then how it shaped my life, and kind of track that a bit. But I talk about that a lot when I do these talks, but tonight I want to talk a little bit more about how I try to develop my own visual metaphors and imagery and to tell my story. And this page I've left up because over here in particular has like several things that kind of carry through the book in terms of imagery. And one is, well, I don't know if you can tell, I mean, can you tell what it is? Okay, it's hands. What else?
Crystal ball?
Yeah, like a crystal ball. And inside of the crystal ball is, can you tell? Maybe you can't tell over there. Okay, so I've got a bird, I've got a crystal ball, which is also a soccer ball, and I've got, sorry, I'm turned on to teacher mode. I taught 2 classes today. And I've got my hands. And so all of these images kind of recur throughout the book. And I use them, the recurring images, to help like make meaning and think through like my metaphors. And so, what do I have there? Oh, so I'm going to show you some other hands. So literally, a goalkeeper, when I went to goalie camp, I learned to make the W, which stops a soccer ball from going like through your hands and into your face. So that W became like this image I wanted to keep coming back to. And I've got me like practicing it while Days of Our Lives is playing in the background, like doing my little goalie practice. And then here, I read an article that talks about the connection between being a writer and being a goalkeeper. And so I'm using this hands, this echoing, like realizing like, oh, right, when I'm typing my stories, I've got that same, W on, now granted, I don't type on a like actual typewriter, although I have like 7 of them. But yes. And then, it's the same as the soccer ball. And then later in the book, I think about when I was exploring visual arts and the way I was using my hands to write, to read, to take photographs, to develop photographs, to write my calligraphy. So just the importance of hands. And then finally, as a mother, like lifting up my daughter, I was like, oh wow, it's that same motion, putting my hands, reaching out to her. From another page in the book, I talk about this tattoo that I have, and I say, in my early goalie days, I was still 30 years away from getting a tattoo of Leonora Carrington's sculpture, The Palmist, with its magical hands. It reminds me of the power of women and art. These days, I'm a writer and professor, and my life is quiet, focused on books, art, and and teaching. It's easy to feel far away from that girl on the soccer field. But looking back now, I wonder, and of course over here, so she's got these like magical hands, these palmists, like, crystal ball kinds of hands. But if I could look into my teenage goalkeeper palms, what would I have seen in my future? And what would I have told myself? So I was obviously thinking about just like this whole memoir project is me like looking back and thinking like, well, if I could have told myself something, what would it have been? So I try to make those connections through the course of the book. A few others, so birds obviously come up a lot, and pretty much it's like Portlandia, like put a bird on it, like when in doubt, on a page. And on the left, that is Sister Teresa of Avila, which I just like stuck in. I went to a Jesuit college, and I was like remembering some of the things that happened with my team, and she just has a quote there that says, being a woman is enough to feel like my wings have been taken off. So that was, which I echoed in the opening bit. And here's an image of me with my daughter on my chest, and I'm reading The Awakening, which is like a rough book for a young mom. But I have a quote from The Awakening, and it's actually really hard for me to read on this screen, but it's basically like, the bird that would soar above the plains of tradition and prejudice must have strong wings. So I thought that was a great quote, because it's me trying to think about, not feeling like I'm fitting in with like the traditional roles that I'm expected to. I also use quite a bit of double images. And so this is, in 1996 was the year of the soccer mom, according to William Safire and kind of everybody else. It was a big year. The soccer moms with their minivans were going to be a big voting constituency. But in 1996, on the right, I'm no longer a soccer player. By then, I've graduated. I'm done with my official playing, and I'm pregnant. So I'm like not quite a mom, but I'm like almost there. So I'm thinking about just like how I feel kind of, neither of those, not a soccer player, not a mom, but creating that double image of, belly, pregnant belly as soccer ball. And then in 1999 was the big U.S. women's national team winning the World Cup on U.S. soil. 90,000 people at the Rose Bowl witnessed it. And there were still a lot of comments about the women's bodies and their looks and how sexy they were. But someone also said that the World Cup was played more like a talent competition in a Miss America pageant than a sporting event. And so this is the winner of the 1999 Miss America pageant. And this is the winning goal scorer of the 1999 World Cup. And I was just too delighted that they both had black on, and that she wasn't wearing some pink fruity fluffy thing, whatever. I just think these images next to each other just strike such a powerful contrast. So that's how I'm using some of these images, and then and to tell some of that story of me thinking about my athlete and writer self. But the other thing that I did was a lot of research. So I started in doing Title IX research. How did it come to get passed? And again, I'm not going to read all of this, but here are some of the key players. Bernice Sandler in the top left, and Representative Edith Green, and Representative Shirley Chisholm, and Representative Patsy Mink. And I think the only thing I really want to point out here, so I kind of talk about how they came to dream and scheme and how they'd all experienced sex discrimination in various ways, especially in educational higher ed institutions, which is kind of where Title IX started. But I just use these images of them, instead of dramatizing scenes of them actually sitting in the same room or or Washington, D.C. scenes or something like that. I just took these images, and I like thinking about the different ways of where you can recontextualize, take an image kind of out of context with a speech bubble. And so I just keep repeating Bernice Sandler with her ERA yes sign, and Edith Green's poster is doing her talking for her, and Shirley Chisholm is at a mic, but it's sort of, she's like, I'll testify when she's already there at the mic. And Patsy Mink, this was from a TV interview, and she's just talking here about how she felt like she not only had to represent her own constituency, but because she was only one of 8 women in Congress, she really had to represent all of the women in the U.S. Senator Birch Bayh taking a run with some girls from Purdue, and he was the senator who helped push it through. And my only images of him are of him running and having this little speech bubble, which I'm sure he did not say while he was running with Purdue co-eds, but talking about how he got really into to women's issues in general, and Title IX in particular, partly because of his wife Marvella, who was notoriously smarter than he was and better than he was as a student. But when she applied to, just for example, when she applied to the University of Virginia, she was told women need not apply. So this is the text of Title IX, which got passed, and I kind of can't do one of these events without doing the text of Title IX. So I also have little postcards over there that are free that you're welcome to take that have the text of it. It's 37 words. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And that or activity really helped with the athletic component. I also like that Nixon is bowling while, he's like, while they're scheming, because they're like, how should we, lobby for this bill? And they're like, and then Edith Green's like, we shouldn't, we'll just lie low so no one knows about it. And Patsy Mink's like, good idea. And then Nixon's bowling and it gets signed into law on June 23rd, 1972. And then again, the same like repeated images, and these are actual quotes from them where like Birch Bayh is like, I had no idea it would have this impact, like specifically on athletics. And Edith Green's like, I never even played sports. And Patsy Mink is like, we had no idea the most visible impact would be on athletics. And Bernice Sandler says, I remember thinking, isn't this great? Girls will have more opportunities at field day. But Title IX would change everything, and so here I wanted to use a big old soccer ball to put some stats about how in 1971, before Title IX, only 300,000 girls were playing high school sports, and by 2019, it was over 3 million, almost 3.5 million, so about 1,000% increase. So I was doing this research and learning all this stuff, and it was really cool. But this was research I kind of expected. It was like I knew I was looking to research Title IX. But as I started doing like research into women's soccer and sports history, I learned some things that I never had heard anything about. Oh, I forgot about this slide. Where I just say my teammates and I didn't know any of this, but it shaped our entire lives, and just kind of coming back to like a row of cardinals as stand-in for the team. So I'm doing this research, and I start coming across women playing football in England, but of course that's what they call soccer, in the 1880s and the 1890s and the 19-teens, and I'm like, what now? I say in the book that, when I was growing up playing soccer, I looked back at my mom's generation, she hadn't played. I looked back at my grandmother's generation, she hadn't played, not just soccer, but really any sports. There were very few opportunities. My mom did the baton twirling thing, whatever that is, and ballet. So I just assumed that was it. I was the first generation of playing like competitive soccer. And I learned that there were these women who were starting leagues in the 1890s. These women were suffragists. These women were like fighting for rational dress, for the right to wear pants. And so they were all tied together, and I loved seeing how these issues were all connected. But these teams mostly didn't take off. But then in 1917, during World War I, there was actually a pretty big explosion, metaphorical, in England. And kind of like we've got A League of Their Own story with World War II and baseball and women playing right here in South Bend, right? During World War I, there were factories that got turned into munitions plants, and women who started working in them, and they started to play soccer, football, during their lunch breaks, and they started to play other munitionettes. And there was like a manager dude who was like, oh, I think we could make some money on this. And so he organized the first game in 1917, and there were 10,000 people who went there to that game, and they only got more popular from there. And so here, that's just a photo reference for you all to see, but these illustrations, I went a little bit more traditional to like following photos, reference photos, and actually some video footage. And so here's another image of them. You can they're just little dots in the background, but you can see like how many people are watching them play. And so by 1921, the war is over, the men are back, the men's teams are starting back, but in 1921 they're super popular, and this is the Dick Kerr ladies, named for their munitions plant, were the most popular ones, and the winningest ones. And in 1921 they played in front of almost 1 million people in 67 games over the course of the year. I think this is like mind blown. Like I grew up playing soccer, never thought any women had ever played soccer. And so, but of course then what happens is the men are feeling threatened and the British Football Association is like, we think you probably shouldn't be playing. So here we have the Dick ladies saying, but what about our bodies and our clothes? Because men always want to regulate women's bodies and tell us what to wear. And so this was where I'm going beyond now just like traditional illustration of the team and giving them little speech bubbles, again, to kind of play with that context a bit. And here is an action shot from a photo where we get some sense of like what was happening. The British Football Association called the game, as you know, this one has in a speech bubble, quite unsuitable for females. It will inhibit fertility and is inherently dangerous. And then this one down here is saying, don't forget about our delicate organism. Because this was some of the language that was used to ultimately initiate a ban against women playing and using FA facilities, Football Association facilities, starting in 1921 and lasting until 1971. So the reason I didn't hear about these women was that they'd been basically snuffed out and their history was forgotten. And so I don't think I have, yeah. So eventually people are starting to uncover these stories and it's actually very exciting. But then in this spread, I'm kind of bringing together my athlete, artist binary and bringing back some of the people and figures that I've mentioned throughout the book. And I say, I don't know why I thought it was so different being an athlete and being an artist. An athlete who is a woman has more in common with an artist who is a woman than with an athlete who is a man. And these are some quotes from some of the women, like these are 3 are soccer players, 3 are writers, artists, and so like she says, there's no reason why football should not be played by women. And this is Virginia Woolf saying, the masculine values prevail. And this is a goalkeeper, or Nettie Honeyball, she called herself, women are not the ornamental and useless, quote, creatures that men have, I forget, I can't see what the word is, called them, whatever. I didn't have time to be anyone's muse. This is Leonora Carrington, who is the artist that I have this tattoo of. And Brian Scurry saying, we want equal pay. So seeing these connections and these overlaps between the quotes, the ideas, the things that the women artists and athletes have been talking about. So I was getting mad and starting to see, you know, things in a different perspective here. And I'm referring here back to grad school on my little tangerine iMac. But I say I was getting angry, I was finding my voice. And you can see that this drawing, this illustration is much different from some of the others that are, you know, a little bit more just representative. And this is, in fact, my art director was like, you know, are you sure you want to use this drawing? Like, don't you want to like redraw it, make it a little bit better or whatever? I was like, no, this is the drawing, like, because this has the energy of the anger that I felt, and I wanted to express that through the illustration. So as I was getting angry in grad school, that was when I began writing, and so my first book is this collection of short stories about, I call them like suburban surrealities, and like, and basically like, you know, the inner lives of women dealing with some of the things like I felt like I was dealing with and my friends were dealing with. You know, like birthday parties at Chuck E. Cheese Pizza, like that kind of stuff. In one story that Joe teaches now and again, a woman gives up her family for Lent. You know, you gotta give up the things you love the most, right? And then I wrote Lillian's Balcony, and this is where I began doing research and wrote and like historical-ish fiction, but also some present about. So this is Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water, and Lillian Kaufman, pictured down here, was completely integral to the planning and the financing of Falling Water. but she's usually just like left out of the histories or like barely mentioned at all. And so, but her husband, Edgar, and her son, EJ, and Frank Lloyd Wright are constantly mentioned. And so I wanted to give her a story and a voice and a space. And so like I reference her as Lilian. Frank Lloyd Wright I only mention as like the architect, and her husband is the husband, and I kind of like try to invert that use of names. And then my next book, The Bitter Life of Božena Nemcová, this is about a Czech fairy tale writer, like bohemian fairy tale writer, who was also the first novelist. Milan Kundera was a big fan of hers, and Franz Kafka were big fans. And here I started putting in, like creating some collages and illustrations that when I submitted the book for publication and my publisher accepted it, were not part of the plans, but I was kind of like, well, I've been doing these collages and illustrations, what do you think? And they were like, sure. So I got really excited about having my own art in the book, and that was where I kind of moved on to to getting into reading a lot of, these are a sampler of some of the books I mentioned before, and different like graphic memoirs, just immersing myself in visual storytelling. Oh, and so, yeah. But if I was gonna do visual storytelling seriously, I had to get better at it. I had to practice drawing and painting. So in 2018, I decided I was gonna start doing a drawing or painting every single day, and I did. And at the end of the year, I did a little reflection on it, where I asked the question, what happens when you commit to painting or any form of creating every day for a year? And I'm gonna have to move over because I can't read my little handwriting, but I think I say you look at the world differently. And I'm pairing it with some of the paintings that I made that year. You see colors and shapes, this is Chippewa Bowl, that you had never seen before. You paint things you would never have imagined painting, like the group of Amish people heading to the 4th of July fireworks show. You read differently. Oops. You misread. I saw this girl, her sweatshirt said Saunders, but I thought it said sadness, and I was like, truer words. I definitely want a sweatshirt that says sadness on the back. You think differently about writing, and here's a quote by Milan Kundera that I paired with some images. You think about art differently. This is Art's Cleaners. And poetry. This is Eileen Miles with a crucifix at Notre Dame and the full moon. And sports. And I had a slight crush on the goalkeeper of the Croatian national team during the World Cup that year. So I was excited to see a goalkeeper again, and got me thinking about my own goalkeeper days. And so this is a page from The Keeper that happened much later, where I say I probably wouldn't have chosen to be a keeper, but I can't think of a position more suited to me. So to just kind of wrap up, after and then even during doing this kind of daily art making, I learned so much about what I liked to draw, the kinds of things I was drawn to drawing, the different media. I was using acrylic and gouache and watercolor and pencil and ink, and so I learned all about that. I practiced different styles and techniques, and I just overall got better at it. So then 2019 happens, and I guess it was 2020, early 2020. 2020. 2019, I think it was 2019. I was like, I'm gonna pitch a comic series at The Rumpus, this magazine, this online journal, and so I wrote a comic series called Welcome to South Bend. It was as Pete Buttigieg was on his presidential campaign, and I did stories about the Fugitive Slave Act in South Bend, but it was narrated by Harriet Beecher Stowe's dogs, because that inspired her to write Uncle Tom's Cabin. And then I did a separate series in 2020, yes. It's called Suffragette City. It was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment being passed. And this is, to what Elizabeth mentioned earlier, a series that I'm now working with students and mentoring them through the process of turning into a Wolfson Press book that we can, hopefully share with local students. Where I've got 5 comics about different suffragists. And so one is Zitkala Shah, and this is just a sampling, but you'll see, I'll just show you 3, how each one has a different style, a different color palette. Zitkala Shah is a Native American who was from South Dakota but moved to Indiana and spent some time here, went to Earlham College. But I'm using like this distinct color palette that, I don't know, it was just reminiscent of like Native American beadwork and that sort of thing. I did a comic on Sojourner Truth called The Substance and the Shadow, and I wanted it to be this really kind of like, stark, bold contrast, black and white. And then I did one on Frederick Douglass and W.E.B. Du Bois, who called themselves women's rights men. And here I was using these images, some of these geometric images were from W.E.B. Du Bois from the Paris exposition in 1910 that he actually had helped to create with all these different statistics about black people's lives in the U.S. And so I brought some of those in as collage, but then I used that color palette to do the rest of the comic. I think I'm about done. This is my little writing studio and art making studio. It's a little bit messier now, but I drew it just to give a little window into things, and this is my messier art desk from like a month or 2 ago. And I think I'm just going to close with that.
Facilitating Q&A.
Awesome.
I'm sure there are a lot of questions. Yes, absolutely. You've been working so hard. I'm going to just start off and then I will facilitate, give people a little time to ruminate if they haven't already. So you talked a little bit about the connection between soccer and writing and motherhood with like the W and everything. But I'm interested in like when you maybe realized that illustration was a talent that you had, and then when did you connect that there was a possibility that you could use that to connect or to communicate what you were writing about?
Yeah. I remember when I was deciding to go to graduate school, I really wanted to go for an MFA in fine arts in painting, but I'd never really taken any official art classes and didn't have a portfolio to speak of. I'd been doing some of these community ed classes that I was showing like, oh, my hand's doing all these things. But now, interestingly, I also didn't really have a portfolio of stories to apply for an MFA in creative writing, but I had an English degree, so it was like fake training. I mean, it's not fake training. And that actually pushed me toward, just like in a practical sense, toward pursuing what ended up being an MA and a PhD in English and creative writing. So I went to a university where you could do a creative dissertation. So I did all of the normal coursework and exams for a PhD, but then the dissertation was a failed novel. So I just always had the interest. I always wanted to take art classes in college, but they always overlapped. They were always 4 hours long, twice a week or something. So they took up most of a day, and they always overlapped with soccer practice. So it just never fit. And so I don't know. So I think it was important to me to just give myself permission to just start doing it. And like I said, in 2018 when I just started drawing every day, it was I know how to learn how to do something. I've got a PhD. I know you just have to do the thing. I teach it all the time. Like I get my students to do it, so I just let myself do it.
Thank you. All right, question. Yes, go ahead. And I'm going to try to repeat it too for recording purposes.
So once in a while I manage to catch a minute or two of the day or the weekend's highlights from European football. And in that minute or two, usually about half of it looks like a frustrating, embarrassing experience for the goalkeeper. And so I guess I would ask, behind that veneer of pain and frustration, what's the appeal of being a keeper?
So I'll repeat the question. Watching soccer highlights, a lot of times it seems like the keeper is the person on the spot, if you will, that makes or breaks the game. So what was it like to kind of play that role?
Yeah. Well, I was very ambivalent about being a keeper. There were, because it's highs and lows and then a lot of just like dead space in between, especially when you're on a really good soccer team like I was. And so, and my poor parents, they'd kind of stand like down parallel with me and we'd just like look at each other like, not much to do. But I mentioned this in the book that like at some point in the last several years when I was like going and talking to like doing readings for my books at universities, and people would ask how I became a writer, I started saying kind of like tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, well, it all started back on the soccer field when I was a goalkeeper, and like making up stories in my head, and the 18-yard box was like my kingdom that I had to protect, and so I would just say that was an advantage. It did let the imagination run wild. The highs are really great. I mean, it's an important position, so it feels like exciting to be in that position. But yeah, I mean, I also remember, like you're also kind of a target when like the whole rest of the game is happening up there. Like I remember in high school, like, and college. In high school, people would, call me Kareem because I was super tall. And then like in college, people would call me Rambo because I wore this bandana. And they would just kind of like plant themselves and taunt me. And I was like, oh, this is great. So yeah, so that's not a reason why, that's confirming what you have to say. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I had a complicated relationship to it, but.
Next question? Anyone? Yes, go ahead.
So you didn't talk about this quite in this talk, but I think it's related, and that is in other parts of the book, you do use collage, including your own excerpts from your diaries and excerpts from some of your early grade school material. We are doing a book group with our students, and they were very interested in this last night when we were talking about that. So I wondered, I mean, seeing this presentation tonight, I'm realizing how similar it is to like collecting quotations and headlines and all of that. So can you talk just a little bit about what it was like to use your own past writing as kind of found history and, really doing, it seems unflinching, and it works really wonderfully in the book.
I'm going to repeat real quickly. So the question is, you, in other parts of the book, use a lot of collage work where you include a lot of your past writing. And so what does that process look like as a, recently found history and, the vulnerabilities, I guess, that come along with that?
Yeah, that's one thing about writing a memoir is a lot of the research you do is into your own archives. So I was getting out old, photograph albums. My mom had a box of Cardinals memorabilia that I was, just kind of struck to see. It had my old Cardinals jacket with all these patches sewn on. It had all these newspaper articles. And then I went back through my old diaries. And yes, it's as painful as you would think it is. And that was actually its own journey in the process. Like at first I was like finding passages from my diary, and you got to like process it as a writer and creator and like what's going to work for the story, but you're also just like, oh God, like what's honest enough without being like, too mortifying, but, so when I'm like, comparing my love life to General Hospital, like, it's like, that's what I did. So, yeah, I mean, oh, and then the video footage too was part of that my, teammate's dad filmed from, in 2 hours, we go from age 13 to age 18, and as I say, it's just like watching our bodies like almost in like stop motion or something, like morph and get curvier and bigger, and our hair gets bigger, and it's just this like, I don't know, fascinating, and so it's like emotional to look at, and then you've got to kind of like think artistically and what's going to work and what do I need for this, and so it's all of, it's all of those things, but I was, struck to, like I was looking for patterns, kind of like I've talked about with some of the visual images, and so, yeah, like my keepsakes book, where it's like I had this little keepsake book from K through 6th grade. They asked the same question. It was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And like on one side there was a list of things boys could be, and on the right side there was a list of things girls could be. And so boys could be like football player, baseball player, hockey player, cowboy, a chef, and then like girls could be like mother, secretary, nurse, air hostess. And and it was really interesting to track like how when I was in like 1st and 2nd grade, I was like, I want to be a football player, a baseball player, a policeman, a nurse, well, not a nurse, but a mother. I don't, like I wanted to be sort of like everything on all sides. And by 3rd grade, all my choices were just on the girls' side. And by 6th grade, the only thing I wanted to be was a model. It was like, oh man, just track girlhood right there on these, So it was interesting to look at it with closeness as well as artistic difference and see how it could tell the story for me.
Any other questions? Yes.
When you think about stories that matter, it seems like your stories matter both to you and for you, but also sort of to the world and to history. Do you see your writing and your art as A, a form of therapy, and B, a form of feminism, or both?
I'm going to try to repeat that question. Do you see your writing as A, a form of therapy, or B, a form of feminism, or both?
Definitely both. In terms of therapy, though, it's more, as I was talking about before, like meaning making, like wanting to, which I guess is what you do in therapy, is like wanting to like understand and make connections and see things in a way that you hadn't before, and so that was. Yeah, those were kind of the two parts of what I was saying. That's sort of like, well, what is the relationship between like being an athlete and being an artist, and like what are the connections rather than the differences? Was that personal, semi-therapy, but angle, and then the rest was like this feminist. It was also personal, but the personal is the political, and I was trying to see like learning more about the history of Title IX and women's sports, and really struck by some of the discoveries, especially just like the ongoing, the patterns that I saw. I was like, oh my gosh, like in 2023, we're still dealing with what we were dealing with in 1993 and 1963 and 1923, and in particular the like sort of obsession with women's bodies, and what they could or couldn't do physically on the field, obsession with women's clothes and what we should or shouldn't be wearing and what's ladylike or not, and then the issue of pay. Because one of the things that the British Football Association cited when they banned women was that they didn't think they should be getting any money for what they were doing, that they were taking money from these charitable situations. So, and we're still dealing with equal pay now. So it was striking to see those connections.
Well, we're just after 8, so I'm going to say a couple of things. First of all, I kind of rushed up here without introducing myself, so I don't know if everyone knows me or not, but I'm Stephanie Risk, and I own LangLab and work here with a great crew of people, and we are just incredibly grateful to have this event here and look forward to many more in the future. So Elizabeth, are you going to come up and talk about the next one, or can I just want to, okay, I don't actually, who will be speaking next month? Sorry?
Right. Professor Kevin Ladd, who is a psychologist who specializes in the psychology of religion, and he will be talking about labyrinths and sort of labyrinths and healing and introspection, and he's going to talk about local labyrinths as well as sort of more broadly worldwide. So really interesting.
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to that as well. So the labyrinth professor as well. And so if you do have questions that we didn't really get to, I would encourage you to stay after. I'm sure Kelcey would be very interested in chatting. That's kind of what we're here for tonight.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was amazing. Thank you so much.